We're ready for the final chapter of Flat Stanley, his original adventure by Jeff Brown. So we're on chapter 5, which is the last chapter of this book. It's called Arthur's Good Idea. And here we are. There's a picture of Stanley walking down the street, getting waves from people. He looks pretty happy still. Hi, Molly. Arthur's Good Idea. For a while, Stanley Lambchop was a famous name. Everywhere that Stanley went, people stared and pointed at him. Hold on. Molly wants a treat. Go get it, Molly. Everywhere that Stanley went, people stared and pointed at him. He could hear them whisper, "Over there, Agnes, over there, look! That must be Stanley Lambchop, the one who caught the sneak thieves," and things like that. But after a few weeks, the whispering and the staring stopped. People had other things to think about. Stanley did not mind. Being famous had been fun, but enough was enough. And then came a different change, and it was not a pleasant one. People began to laugh and make fun of him as he passed by. "Ha! Hello, Super Skinny," they would shout, and even ruder things about the way he looked. Stanley told his parents how he felt. "It's the other kids I mostly mind," he said. "They don't like me anymore because I'm different, flat." "Shame on them," Mrs. Lambchop said. "It is wrong to dislike people for their shapes, or their religion for that matter, or the color of their skin." "I know," Stanley said, "only maybe it's impossible for everybody to like everybody." "Perhaps," said Mrs. Lambchop, "but they can try, and they can still be nice about it, right?" Later that night, Arthur Lambchop was broken up by the sound of crying. In the darkness, he crept across the room and kneeled by Stanley's bed. "Are you okay?" he said. "Go away," Stanley said. "Don't be mad at me," Arthur said. "You're still mad because I let you get tangled up the day you were my kite, I guess." "Skip it, will you?" Stanley said. "I'm not mad. Go away." "Please, let's be friends." Arthur couldn't help crying a little too. "Oh, Stanley," he said, "please tell me what's wrong." Stanley waited for a long time before he spoke. The thing is," he said, "I'm just not happy anymore. I'm tired of being flat. I want to be a regular shape, like other people. But I'll have to go on being flat forever. It makes me sick." Poor Stanley. "Oh, Stanley," Arthur said. He dried his tears on a corner of Stanley's sheet and could think of nothing more to say. "Don't talk about what I just said," Stanley told him. "I don't want the folks to worry. That would only make it worse." "You're brave," Arthur said. "You really are." He took hold of Stanley's hand. The two brothers sat together in the darkness, being friends. They were both still sad, but each one felt a little better than he had before. That's nice that they were getting along again, right? And then, suddenly, though he was not even trying to think, Arthur had an idea. He jumped up and turned on the light and ran to the big box where toys and things were kept. He began to rummage in the box. Stanley sat up in bed to watch. Arthur flung aside a football and some soldiers and an airplane models and lots of wooden blocks. And then he said, "Aha!" He had found what he wanted, an old bicycle pump. He held it up, and Stanley and he looked at each other. "Okay," Stanley said at last, "but take it easy." He put the end of the long pump hose in his mouth and clamped his lips tightly about it so that no air could escape. "I'll go slowly," Arthur said. "If it hurts or anything, wiggle your hand at me." He began to pump. At first, nothing happened, except that Stanley's cheeks bulged a bit. Arthur watched his hand, but there was no wiggle sign, so he pumped on. Then, suddenly, Stanley's top half began to swell. "It's working! It's working!" shouted Arthur, pumping away. Stanley spread his arms so that the air could get around inside him more easily. He got bigger and bigger. The buttons of his pajama top popped off. Pop, pop, pop. A moment more, and he was all rounded out, head and body, arms and legs. But not his right foot. That foot stayed flat. They blew him up. Arthur stopped pumping. "It's like trying to do the very last bit of those long balloons," he said. "Maybe a shake would help." Stanley shook his right foot twice, and with a little whooshing sound, it swelled out to match the left one. There stood Stanley Lambchop, as he used to be, as if he had never been flat at all. "Thank you, Arthur," Stanley said. "Thank you very much." The brothers were shaking hands when Mr. Lambchop walked into the room with Mrs. Lambchop right behind him. "We heard you," said Mr. Lambchop. "Up and talking when you ought to be asleep, huh? Shame on you." "George," said Mrs. Lambchop, "Stanley's round again." "You're right," said Mrs. Lambchop, noticing. "Good for you, Stanley." "I'm the one who did it," Arthur said. "I blew him up." Everyone was terribly excited and happy, of course. Mrs. Lambchop made hot chocolate to celebrate. Mrs. Lambchop made hot chocolate to celebrate the occasion, and several toasts were drunk to Arthur for his cleverness. When the little party was over, Mr. and Mrs. Lambchop tucked the boys back into their beds and kissed them, and then they turned out the lights. "Good night," they said. "Good night," said Stanley and Arthur. It had been a long and tiring day. Very soon, all the Lambchops were asleep. The end. How exciting. I hope you enjoyed Flat Stanley's original adventure.